What do you mean as a state sponsor of terrorism, though? How do you define terrorism?
Are we going to argue that Iran is literally the number one?
Is Iran committing genocide in Gaza right now, like the Israeli government is, which dragged us into this war, which every president prior...
number one sponsor of terrorism.
For 47 years, the Iranians have killed Americans and our allies across this world.
Okay.
They are trying to obtain nuclear weapons so they can annihilate Israel and potentially capitals in Europe.
There's no evidence of that. The JCPOA was actually a successful deal that Obama
I find
negotiated.
It appalling that you're an Iranian apologist.
Yeah, this is so. There's nothing I can do that call out Israel's genocide and then everybody swarms.
No. In this video, a tense moment unfolds on CNN Newsnight as Emma Vigeland faces off against Tim Parrish and Pete Seat in a heated 2-against-1 exchange about Iran sanctions, rising tensions in the Middle East, and the real consequences of US foreign policy decisions. As Parrish and Seat argue that the pressure strategy is necessary for national security and regional stability, Emma Vigeland pushes back hard, questioning whether the policy is built on a coherent long-term strategy or simply reactive politics. The debate quickly intensifies as she challenges the assumptions behind the argument and presses them on the lack of clear answers. What follows is a sharp exchange where Vigeland forces the conversation toward accountability, exposing gaps in the reasoning while defending the need for transparency and consistent policy goals.
Now we're talking about potentially boots on the ground. They're sending the paratroopers there, which they have one job. they go and try to get on the ground, and Marines are already in the region. What should happen as far as the president's responsibility for bringing the American people along on this?
Look, I always want every president to go through the constitutional process of working with their co-equal branch of government in the Congress to ask for either a formal declaration of war or the authorization for use of military force. That every president should do that. What we've seen historically is very few presidents, I think going back to World War II, have in fact gone through this formal process. And gone to Congress to ask for those authorizations. I don't think we need boots on the ground at this stage. And the reason why I say that is I don't want that. War is ugly. It's nasty. It's not something that I want to see any American have to deal with. And so if the president and Secretary Rubio can utilize the steps that they're going through the diplomatic process. They have the Pakistanis working to do these negotiations. And I believe in my heart of hearts that the president does want this to come to an end without having to do boots on the ground. But I also will tell you this president is a president of action. We've seen past administrations use big words and things and say that they draw lines in the sand and all these things if Iran does something. This president means business. If Iran rears its ugly head and attempts to continue doing what they've done for many, many years as the number one state sponsor of terrorism, this president will take action. I don't want that to happen. I don't think anyone at this table or any of the American public wants that to happen, but everyone should be on notice that this is a president of action who will, in fact, do what he needs to do to carry out his mission of protecting the American public.
What do you mean as a state sponsor of terrorism, though? How do you define terrorism?
Are we going to argue that Iran is literally the number one?
Is Iran committing genocide in Gaza right now, like the Israeli government is, which dragged us into this war, which every president prior...
number one sponsor of terrorism.
For 47 years, the Iranians have killed Americans and our allies across this world.
Okay.
They are trying to obtain nuclear weapons so they can annihilate Israel and potentially capitals in Europe.
There's no evidence of that. The JCPOA was actually a successful deal that Obama negotiated.
I find it appalling that you're an Iranian apologist.
Yeah, this is so. There's nothing I can do that call out Israel's genocide and then everybody swarms.
No.
This is the one thing that you can't say. It's the one thing you can't say. It is about Gaza. This is about a regional conflict that's spiraling out of control that the president is adding to.
But you stated that there's no evidence that Iran wants nuclear weapons. They lied.
There has been a religious edict that has said since 2003 that they should not be creating a nuclear weapon.
They lied to the United Nations. They lied to the international...
We killed the Ayatollah, the older father, who was actually against building a nuclear weapon because he thought that it was going to contribute here.
I'm genuinely shocked that you are defending the Iranians. And I got to tell you, I hope that you tuck yourself in at night under that pillow of lies that you just told about the Iranians. That is absolute a crock of a word I can't say on national television.
So the United States is funding a government that an Israeli human rights group that Selim says is committing genocide, as is Amnesty International, as is every credible human rights group right now. We are there's a massacre in Gaza. There are hundreds of thousands of people unaccounted for under rubble. That's what I define as terrorism. Now, Iran is now exerting their leverage over the Strait of Hormuz.
Is Hezbollah a terrorist organization?
Do you want the Iranians to have a nuclear weapon, yes or no?
Thousands of people that have died at the
Everybody
hands of
here talking
Iran
over
would
each other.
disagree with your personal description of what terrorism is. And I'm sorry, it doesn't meet the,
Okay, so
the bill of
I
what
mean,
it actually
killing
is.
civilians is what I define it as.
The discussion quickly expands into a broader issue about how foreign policy narratives are constructed compared to how events actually unfold in reality. It is not simply about identifying a threat or demonstrating strength on a global stage. The real question is whether those claims are supported by verifiable intelligence and a consistent long-term plan. Over the years, multiple intelligence assessments have indicated that Iran paused its nuclear weapons development back in 2003. While concerns about future capabilities still exist, experts have repeatedly debated how immediate the danger truly is. That disconnect between political messaging and documented intelligence often fuels public skepticism. The situation becomes even more complicated when military positioning begins to escalate. Deploying naval forces, increasing troop presence, or expanding strategic assets immediately raises tensions regardless of whether a clear objective has been defined. History shows how quickly limited actions can expand into prolonged involvement. Conflicts such as Iraq and Afghanistan began with narrow missions but gradually evolved into extended commitments that lasted years. Human rights organizations have also raised concerns about civilian casualties and regional instability, adding another layer to how these decisions are evaluated globally. There is also the ongoing debate over how terms like terrorism are applied. If the definition revolves around harm to civilians, critics argue that it should be enforced consistently rather than selectively based on alliances. That inconsistency is where many observers begin questioning the credibility of official narratives. As public explanations simplify complex geopolitical situations into clear-cut stories, more people are starting to examine the gap between rhetoric and reality. Without a transparent roadmap or measurable accountability, it becomes difficult to determine whether policies are truly focused on long-term security or shaped more by short-term political calculations.
Former diplomat and former advisor at the Department of Defense who has worked in the region and worked on all these issues. Two things can be true at the same time. The United States is supporting an Israeli government that has violated international law and is committing war crimes, and Iran is a state sponsor of terror, right? Those are both true. These are the realities the United States has had to reckon with for decades of U.S. foreign policy. It is also why the United States has not ever put its hand on the lever in such a hard way as to bring the war to Iran that Iran has been itching for, because Iran is able to defend. It is now had all the possible folks who would have revolted and overthrown the regime. They suddenly woke up one day to having everything around them bombed. There was no CIA or Mossad effort to actually support a proper uprising, which is frankly what the United States did with the Shah. So we know we have the capability of doing that. None of that planning or strategy existed. We had U.S. embassies being attacked by drones and on fire in allied countries because our allies had no idea this was happening. So the United States went all in on something that Benjamin Netanyahu has wanted for decades. Yep. And we're calling that action and strong. And guess what? The president of the United States, the commander-in-chief, wants to walk away from that right now.
There's
no indication of that.
When the president of the United States calls this, what we are seeing right now, a victory that is entirely rhetoric, that is entirely spin, military capabilities have absolutely been degraded. Absolutely true. But we are seeing economic impacts, we are seeing downstream effects, we are seeing impacts to the American public without any effort having been made to convince the American public, that this was necessary.
Terry,
hold on, Terry. The one thing you need in a president in wartime is credibility. And Trump is all over the map, right? First it was unconditional surrender and regime change. Now we won. Carolyn Levitt is out there saying the Iranians are defeated and will continue to be defeated. He says, I'm going to end this war. Don't worry, it's not going to last that long. He does not know what to do. And he says he was surprised that Iran, which has been waiting for this moment for a long time, and anyone who spent any time there, anyone who's read a book, knows that the war they wanted was against the other Gulf states. Trump says nobody knew they were going to bomb UAE or Saudi or whatever. Of course they are. And the notion that it's won already or that they're defeated, they just bombed a U.S. air base.
Can I just say real quick?
The enemy always gets a say.
I disagree, Terry, with you, because in this situation, I think the fact that the president can be confusing in his language, that he contradicts himself and his subordinates, is intentional. It's deliberate deception. And when you're in the midst of a negotiation...
Hold on. Is he deliberately deceiving the American public? Is he deliberately deceiving
the Iranians?
Congress?
You're in the midst of a negotiation. And trust me, I know we're all impatient. We talk about this conflict. It's only been 4 weeks. We talk about it like it's been 4 years.
This raises a critical question that goes beyond labeling any action as successful or necessary. The real issue is whether the strategy can withstand careful scrutiny over time. Defense analysts have long warned that Iran possesses extensive regional influence and relies heavily on asymmetric capabilities, which means that escalation rarely stays contained. Because of that risk, previous administrations from both political parties often avoided direct, large-scale confrontation, aware that even limited actions could spiral into broader conflict. The situation becomes even more complex when considering how these decisions affect both global alliances and domestic stability. Military action does not occur in isolation. It influences diplomatic relationships, economic conditions, and public confidence at home. For example, instability in the Middle East has repeatedly triggered global energy disruptions, which then translate into inflation and higher living costs for ordinary citizens. When allies appear unprepared or coordination looks inconsistent, it raises concerns about whether there is a unified long-term strategy guiding those decisions. Experts in international relations often emphasize that strong alliances and clear communication are just as important as military strength, particularly during high-risk geopolitical confrontations. Messaging also plays a significant role in shaping public perception. When leaders present shifting explanations or inconsistent statements, it becomes harder for the public to understand what the ultimate objective actually is. Previous conflicts have shown that unclear goals can gradually erode trust and support. When governments move between different aims, such as deterrence, regime change, or quick resolution, the lack of a defined endpoint creates uncertainty about the final outcome. Over time, that uncertainty leads many people to question whether policies are truly strategic or simply reactive responses to unfolding events.
And we're impatient. We want certainty. We want to know what's coming next. But so do the Iranians.
That's true,
and
but here's the thing.
We cannot tell them. We can't tip our hat.
The reason I think why people are impatient is because they didn't know it was coming. The American public was not sold on this. Congress was not sold on this.
And that means the Iranians didn't know it was coming. No. Mind you, we were putting forces in the Middle East.
But wait a minute. But you've also got Nancy Mace, who has said that Iran is becoming an Iraq. That's how she sees it. Now, that's her opinion. That's her opinion.
Again, it's been 4 weeks. But she can take a chill pill.
Understood. But if you have someone who has been a great supporter of Donald Trump saying this, then certainly the American public is looking at this and wondering, why are we here? And now that we are here, now what? Because gas is going up, right? There are economic issues that are hitting Americans in ways that they thought that Donald Trump was going to solve. So how do you explain to them that this is going to be for the better good?
$11 billion a day, right? Like, that's part of the explanation. What are we doing with $11 billion a day? What has the American public gained in safety and security that it did not have a month ago?
All of the points that have been made here, we're in a very cordial debate, and I think that all of the points have been heard and well taken, except this one. There can be there can be no ambiguity. There can be no question. And the American public, I think, is sitting at home watching this, gripping their chairs at the idea that you are a Iranian sympathizer. And the people
gripping their chairs?
The people that, and it's not funny. The idea of what the, and that's scary. The idea of what the Iranian regime has done around the world, not just to Americans, but to their own people. You talked about rights and things. They killed 30,000 people.
I don't defend the Iranian government, but the reason that we have this government is because they reinstalled the Shah.
He asked you a question about, do you want Iran to have a nuclear bomb? And
the reason this government exists is because I don't want anyone to. I want that we should have denuclearization across the board, and Israel shouldn't have.
You guys are really piling on Emma, because I have not heard either one of you say anything critical of either the U.S. military operation right now, either the fact that Israel has more of a plan and a strategy, and the United States, which is supposed to be leader, is following Israel. I mean, come on.
I'm
asking you now to clarify this point. How do you guys feel about the United States following another country's military strategy?
Ultimately, the debate reveals a deeper issue about how major policy decisions are presented compared to how they are interpreted by the public. It is not only about military strategy, but also about transparency and trust. when the United States increases involvement in international conflicts without clear congressional approval or thorough explanation to the public, confidence tends to decline rapidly. Similar patterns were seen during the Iraq War, when early justifications later conflicted with subsequent findings, leaving lasting skepticism among many Americans. Because of that history, public reactions to new military actions are often shaped by past experiences. When significant developments occur without clear communication, people naturally become cautious about the motives and consequences involved. The domestic impact also becomes visible very quickly. Foreign policy decisions do not stay confined to distant regions. Rising tensions in the Middle East frequently cause oil prices to surge, which then affects everyday economic realities. Transportation costs increase, food prices rise, and basic goods become more expensive for households. Energy analysts have repeatedly shown that even short periods of instability in the region can add billions in global economic costs. As a result, many people begin asking what tangible benefits justify those immediate financial burdens. The question becomes even more pressing when the long-term advantages remain unclear. Another challenge involves consistency in leadership decisions. If the goal truly centers on stability and security, the strategy must remain independent and clearly defined. However, when policy choices appear influenced by shifting narratives or outside pressures, doubts about leadership direction inevitably grow. Past conflicts have demonstrated that unclear objectives can extend military involvement far longer than originally anticipated. Without a specific end goal or measurable benchmarks, the public begins to question whether the approach is guided by a long-term strategy or simply responding to events as they unfold without a clear path forward.